Tantor Audio, a division of Recorded Books, presents A Whisper Before Dawn by Casey Kingmaker, narrated by Meghan Kelly. 1. My heart galloped in my chest. Gideon would be so angry if he knew I'd gone out to Vaughn's alone. It was a full moon, after all, which everyone knew was when the worst dangers of the land roam freely.
Literally, any other day,
my brother would tell me.
Any other day would be safer, Dawn.
But the kids in the village needed food now. They wouldn't make it another day, especially Sarah. Poor pregnant Sarah, who should have been eating for 2, but currently ate for less than 1. I could only imagine how malnourished and tiny that baby would come out. I couldn't think about that right now, though. I'd found myself in a bit of a pickle. A deadly pickle. I was cornered, hiding, with a stream of fear sweat running down my forehead. Apparently, a big baddie had decided to pad over to Vaughn's at the same time I had. And he was real big and real bad. A giant monstrous wolf thing with teeth as big as my fingers, eyes as red as rubies, and black prickly fur filling its body. The thing was as big as a fucking horse, and right now, I was in its crosshairs, which meant I was going to die. No two ways about it. Pureblood lycanthropes could smell a fart on the other side of the country. And seeing as I hadn't taken a proper bath in, 2 weeks or so, I was guessing that my odor was making his stupid lolling tongue salivate. No, wait. It was the rancid sweet stench of rotten fruit spilling out of the overturned crate that was making him drool, at least for the moment. But once he'd lapped up those moldy peaches, he'd be lapping up my peach, and that didn't sound appetizing for anyone involved, especially me. Despite my inner gallows humor, I was terrified. Gallows humor wasn't very funny when it was your own ass on the gallows. Stupid, Dawn. Stupid, foolish idiot. Gideon's gonna be so pissed you died this way. Totally preventable. Another unnecessary death in a veritable sea of unnecessary deaths. But that's what us stupid humans did, right? We made mistakes. We sometimes learn from them. I guess I wasn't a quick learner. Brushing my limp dark hair out of my eyes, I peered through the wood panels. My heartbeat throbbed in my ears. I was crouched behind a large makeshift box of stacked 2x4s, which probably used to house something like peaches. Now it was my laughably lame attempt at a hideaway. I felt like those dumbass kids from Jurassic Park, trying to hide from the velociraptors. But then, I remembered those kids had escaped. Via diversion. Raising my eyebrows, I continued to peek through the open space, keeping my dark orbs half-lidded. The wolf was about 20 feet away, nosing through the moldy fruit. I knew he could close that gap in 2 seconds flat. There was no way I was going to outrun this thing. I needed it to think I wasn't even here. I needed enough time to leap out of my box, run across the causeway 40 feet to the left, and dart off into the night. The warehouse that used to be Vaughn's was a mere skeleton of its former self. Detritus filled the aisles. The tile floor was cracked and broken, making the ground uneven, not good for running. The building had long been abandoned, but savvy foragers could often find scraps of food here and there, which had been my plan tonight before Mr. Peach Gobbler ruined my party. I noticed a tiny dark blob behind the wolf. My eyes widened. It was a courageous rat, seeing if he could snake some of the wolf's findings for his own family. The rat definitely had more balls than I did, but he was getting dangerously close to those back paws. I blinked. For a split second, things went wavy in my brain, dizzy. When I opened them, I was looking up at the wolf, at his swishing tail, staring right up at his butthole. I scrunched my face. What the hell is this? Where am I? Then whiskers bobbed in my eyesight. Am I Ratatouille? The wolf's head lurched up, his body going taut. My tiny rat heart froze in its tiny rat chest. The wolf spun around, jaws gaping. I was already scurrying away toward a shaded corner. Then I was tumbling through the air, squeaking my ever-loving face off. A crunch, then everything went black. My mind cracked, red and yellow dots exploding behind my lids. A sharp tug of pain rippled through my body. My eyes shot open, a choking sob racked me, and for a moment I didn't know where I was. Everything seemed foreign and out of place. I toppled from my crouched position, erupting out of the box in a flurry of elbows and wood chips, totally confused. Petrified, my bulging eyes stared down the aisle. At the sound of my unintended escape, the wolf's snout jerked in my direction. I was staring into its deep red eyes. I screamed, then took off to the left. With a roar, the wolf pursued, his powerful legs pushing him off the ground into a depressingly long stride. I made it about 5 feet. My little human legs were so weak. Something hard and heavy swept my feet out from under me, and I was flying forward. I put my hands out to break my fall, to avoid face-planting on the cracked tiles. I quickly rolled onto my back, but it was futile. 2 huge paws clamped down on my outstretched arms. I stared up at the wolf's terrible drooling visage, his breath reeking of decay and pungent fruit. Tears fell from the corners of my eyes. Damn you, Vons. I wish I had never come here. Next time, I'm shopping at Whole Foods. Even staring death in the eyes, my stupid squirrel brain wouldn't stop. I slammed my eyes shut as the wolf's angry face lowered to mine. His hot, nasty saliva dripped down my cheeks. He sniffed, then made a weird sound in his throat. When I slowly opened my eyes, his head was reared back, a confused expression masking his canine features. Who's a good boy? I croaked. Mr. Peach Gobbler sniffed louder, his wet nose scrunching. His face seemed to shift, somehow, and I noticed a sadness in those bestial eyes that was unexplainable. As crazy as it seemed, I wanted to speak to him, to snuggle against him and try to talk my way out of my impending doom, to listen to his problems. But I was too scared to talk. My body felt warm and my knees knocked together underneath his huge, girthy weight. Then his weight lifted off my body. He darted away, just like that, careening down the aisle. I sat up, panting and heaving, my eyes bugging out of their sockets. I watched him crash into shit until he reached the exit and vanished outside. What the hell? That was freaking weird. I didn't trust my shaking legs to sustain me, so I just reclined once more, breathing deeply, staring up at the decrepit ceiling. My mind whirled. My breath came out in wheezes. I love you, Vons. I'll never betray you. I take back every foul, hurtful thing I've ever said. I'll never shop anywhere else.
It what?
Gideon asked in disbelief. My brother was dark-haired like me, stocky, and a bit on the shorter side. He had a mop of curls that frequently splashed into his eyes. As he stared at me in awe, he swept his bangs away. I'm telling you, Giddy, it was like it smelled something sour on me.
That would be your B.O.
I squinted at him. Well, whatever it was, it scared the big pup off. All the kids were gathered around the literal trash fire I'd made for story time of how Little Red Riding Hood escaped the big bad wolf. It was a fair mix of actual kids and kids my own age. Everyone was entranced, and I had the ripped sleeves to prove my claim that I'd been attacked by a giant creature.
Do you think the wolfie would spare me, Donnie?
Little Ricky asked with big puppy dog eyes. The skinny little boy nibbled at a hard piece of bread. My heart broke at seeing him eating so precariously, like he knew he might not have a meal tomorrow, so he savored every bite of the stale chunk. I could tell he was frightened by my story of narrow escape. Lycanthropes weren't supposed to be this far out in the fringe. I gave him a reassuring smile and patted his slender, malnourished arm. I think...
No,
Gideon blurted with a growl.
Don't feed the kid lies, Dee. It'll get him nowhere.
I scowled at my brother. Despite his good intentions, he could be callous and insensitive. He was still flustered over his sister almost getting munched. Gideon and I were as close could be without things being weird. He was all I had, and I was all he had. Ever since the tragic event that neither of us liked to speak about, we'd been on our own. Over the last few years, we'd grown incredibly close. We had moved to this little shanty town on the outskirts of the city, the area we called the Fringe, with a bunch of other homeless kids. All walks of life, all humans. They couldn't really be called homeless either, because we'd turned the place into a village, with each family unit having their own little hovel, tenement, or trailer. It was a village filled with the malcontents and undesirables of human society, the forgotten bunch. We didn't much care for other humans around here, the so-called model citizens, because they treated us like outcasts. And we hated the others, also known as supernaturals, for what they'd done to our beautiful cities and way of life. I couldn't understand how some of the others were accepted into human society so willy-nilly like they belonged. Not after all they'd done. There was a bitterness in my heart that I couldn't get over. I constantly wondered, were the humans just weak and eager to appease their new supernatural overlords? I mean, hell, some of the others had become downright celebrities. They chummed with politicians and showed up in news broadcasts with their million-dollar magical smiles. The Fringe used to be the countryside outskirts of a beautiful Southern California city. But since being overrun by the Abnorms, our home was becoming more and more dangerous. Tonight was proof of that. Abnorms was what we called the Dark Others, forgotten beings turned from vamps into bloodthirsty ghouls, nomadic shifters without a pack, maverick fae. Those guys, the supernaturals that were deemed too wicked even for their own kind. Then again, that solitary rat-killing Thrope could have ended me tonight. But he hadn't. Maybe I needed to rethink my theory on Abnorms and others. No, they endangered our lives. Unfortunately, we didn't know where else to go. That little out-of-body experience I'd had with the rat scared the hell out of me. I'd never felt anything like that, as if I could feel the little rat's breaths and read his thoughts. His thoughts had been to eat and then to scurry away. Unfortunately, he didn't make it that far. I decided to keep it to myself because I didn't want people to think I was going crazy. I looked over and saw little Ricky's eyes were wet. He was pouting, and his eyes glistened sadly because Gideon talked to children like they were soldiers in a militia. He talked to everyone like that, and I couldn't fault him for it, but it still irked me that he didn't apply a little more nuance with the poor boy. Ricky sniffled, rubbing his runny nose with his arm.
I'll protect you from bad guys, Ricky,
a confident voice said from the other side of the fire. My heart fluttered as I looked through the dinky flame. I smiled at Derek, a young man close to my own age who I'd been becoming increasingly close to recently. Derek was tall and handsome, with short blonde hair, a strong jaw, and a boxy chin. Gideon had called it a very punchable face, but I knew he was just jealous that I was getting some and he wasn't. My brother had the charm for it, but he was more often standoffish and blunt, which weren't very attractive qualities. I hadn't had sex with Derek yet, but I knew we were getting close. In these tumultuous times, people were expected to jump into bed with anyone and everyone. But I was more cautious than that. I'd been burned before. Ricky's face lit up. "Thank you, Uncle Derek." Gideon gritted his teeth, taking Derek's words as a challenge.
I'm sorry, Ricky. I will too. In fact, I'll teach you how to protect yourself. How does that sound?
The boy turned to my brother, eyes glowing with cherubic innocence. "Will you really, Giddy?"
Of course.
Leaning forward in his seat, Derek opened his mouth to retort. I held my palm up, cutting him off. I saw where this dick-measuring contest was going, and I wasn't having it. Stupid boys. They'll get into an argument over anything. Not 2 minutes ago they were gawking at my near-death experience, and now this? Tensions are running high in our little homestead. My gaze fell on the other fringe folk around our fire as I reached behind the overturned crate I was using as a chair. There were about 5 kids and 6 adults present, a good turnout. I gave them all a sly smile as I took my time reaching behind me. The curious crowd murmured. Still grinning, I pulled out an unopened bag of marshmallows. Gasps across the board. A kid screamed. "Donnie brought marshmallows!" Her foster dad smiled and tousled her hair, pulling the girl close. I swear the kids around the campfire looked at me like I was a literal saint. Saint Donnie of the s'mores, patron of marshmallows and graham crackers. Gideon narrowed his eyes at me. As the others cheered happily, he whispered at my side.
"You nearly died and yet managed to snag a bag of sugar clouds?"
I shrugged, tossing him the bag. "The wolf left me alone, Broham. I had plenty of time to shop after that." He rolled his eyes, huffing.
"Careless and reckless, Dawn. He could have come back."
"True, but I was pretty positive that whatever the werewolf had smelled on me had scared him off for good. I'd also gotten a shitload of beans, rice, tortillas, and other foods I could carry that wouldn't spoil quickly." I felt a set of eyes peering at me through the fire. Glancing over, I saw Derek staring at me, his mouth in a smirk. I'd know that look anywhere. "You have to take chances in life, right?" I told Gideon as I stood from my crate.
Where are you going?"
He sounded scared to be left alone with the riotous kids. "To find sticks so the young'uns can cook those tasty sumbitches." He frowned, watching me walk away from the fire. Everyone's attention was firmly away from me, focused on the puffy treats sitting on Gideon's lap. He'd have to dole them out like rations. If he couldn't be a cool father figure, I would force him to be one. The marshmallow bag was a test. Kind of. And after that, he could distribute some rice and beans and be a real hero to the people like little Ricky and Sarah. It would take him a little while to realize I wasn't coming back with sticks. Less than a minute after I'd disappeared from the campfire, I spied Derek scooting away from the circle. I smiled as he escaped unseen and headed toward me. 2. I took Derek's hand in mine and led him away from the gathering. When our fingers touched, warmth spread up my arm, then blossomed through my body. My eyes widened and my face grew hot, but I hid it well by turning on my heels and pulling him toward the road. I felt like I was on the edge of a rickety diving board, staring down at the deep blue water, butterflies doing loop-de-loops in my stomach. Maybe tonight would be the night we took the plunge. I hadn't known Derek long, but I knew he was a good man. He was tall, with broad shoulders and strong arms from years of carpentry. Since he'd arrived in the Fringe a few months back, he'd quickly become the resident woodworker. If your hovel needed repairs or the foundation of your tenement seemed wonky, Derek was your guy. Honestly, he was a godsend to us. He also commanded respect with his sheer size and imposing presence, but I knew he was really a giant teddy bear. He was honest, laughed easily, and was great with the kids. He was helpful to anyone who asked for aid and wasn't afraid to get his hands dirty. It was easy to see why I'd fallen for him so quickly, though I'm not sure what he saw in me. He said it was my mind, my sharp wit, and the tenderness I showed the kids. But I knew that a lot of men said things like that, so I was always wary of it. I also knew he loved my chocolate hair because he'd run his hands through it when we kissed, and my cute face because he always told me that when he caressed my cheeks with his calloused fingers. When he first arrived in the Fringe like a lost puppy, I had been immediately drawn to him. We'd spent a few nights staying up late talking about our dystopian reality. He had told me it wasn't like this everywhere, The shoddy housing situation, the broken spirits, the meager sustenance. One of the reasons he'd fled the metropolis that had been his home was because there were too many others intermingling with humans there. Despite his size, he feared the supernaturals just as much as the rest of us. So in that way, he fit in perfectly with our little community. I'd learned that he was in his mid-20s. I found it odd he hadn't given me an exact number, which made him a few years older than me. One thing led to another, and before long, well, I tugged him urgently past a few ramshackle houses. He chuckled as he tried to keep up with me.
"Geez, Dee, what's gotten into you?"
he asked in a light-hearted whisper, his feet clomping on the gravel behind my lighter footfalls. I wasn't sure. Maybe it was the near-death experience I'd had earlier in the night that made the chemicals in my brain erupt, or the realization that death was close at hand on any given day. But my run-in with the werewolf had made me feel more alive than I had in weeks, my adrenaline still pumping, and I was pretty sure I wanted to jump Derek's bones. We skirted along the dingy village beneath the starlit night sky, keeping to the shadows. It wasn't difficult when we had such poor lamplight and only intermittent electricity in the Fringe. I didn't want to do my thing with him too close to people's houses. People talked. Although I practically lived with 20 other brothers, sisters, and children, I didn't need them to know about every stitch of my personal life. What I did on my own time was no one's damn business. So I actually brought Derek outside the Fringe's borders. We hopped over a short barrier wall that marked the end of the Fringe zone and sped down a deserted freeway with cracked pavement and faded yellow lines running down it. I felt Derek's grip tighten over my hand. Is he worried? I wondered, feeling slightly bad to be leading him away from our home. Does he think I'm taking him somewhere to violate him? Or worse? I hid a dark grin, tossing aside the foolish thoughts. Oh, you have no idea what I have in store for you, buddy boy. A few minutes later, we were well and truly far from the Fringe, and I cut right, away from the freeway. We gallivanted through an abandoned town square. Everything around had a purple moonlit sheen. Dumpsters, barrels, storefronts of deserted shops and restaurants, the pavement itself. Every 20 feet or so a flickering streetlight brightened the area underneath it. It was slightly eerie, but better than that, it was a totally abandoned place. I'd done some exploring away from the Fringe in my time, and I'd found some pretty nifty hiding spots to use as evacuation zones if tragedy ever struck the Fringe. Past the town square, we came to the mouth of an alley. It was dark and foreboding, without a single light nearby, and even the moon was blocked by the high walls on either side of us. The closest street lamp was on the other side of the alley, intermittently blinking and lighting up a dumpster. But that was a good 50 feet away. Once we were just a few feet into the shadows of the alley, I abruptly turned and shoved Derek against one of the concrete walls. He let out an oof and stared down at me with startled eyes. I gave him a hungry look, smiled, and licked my lips. We were both panting from the excessive running I'd subjected us to, just to get to this rather non-ideal location. He squinted, trying to read my face. Something made me hesitate. A pang of guilt? I thought back to Vaughn's, the strong werewolf holding me pinned to the ground. Why was this monster still nagging at me? And why now, of all times, when I was so close to getting it on with Derek? I wondered if there was something special about that beast, something I had missed, and then I shook my head and tossed aside the crazy thoughts.
"Are you okay?"
Derek asked. I went onto my tiptoes and pushed close against him to erase any doubt about what I wanted. He dipped his head and met mine, and then we were locked in a tight embrace. Our lips touched. Heat washed down my spine. I tilted my head so our noses didn't smash so hard together as we made out. His tongue darted into my mouth and glided across the roof. I chased his tongue with mine, and then they were dueling for dominance. His right hand strayed down to my hip, rounded the curve, and squeezed my ass through my jeans. His other hand cupped the back of my head to run his fingers through my dark hair, as he was wont to do. Our eyes closed. We kept our lips locked for an interminable amount of time. I lost track of everything in my life as our tongues danced. It was exactly what I needed, respite from the tumultuous, crazy life I lived, that we all lived. Days were tough in the Fringe, scrounging for food, wondering where the next meal was going to come from. Nights were worse, scary, unknown. Moments like these were few and far between. They reminded me of my teenage years in high school, before everything had gone to shit. I hadn't been a floozy by any stretch, but I was often scolded by my brother when he caught me kissing boys. And let's just say it happened more than once. When we parted, we were both breathless, our eyes locked. I searched his face and ran a hand softly over his boxy chin, the line of his jaw, and the light stubble there. My eyes felt watery, but I wasn't sure why I was filled with so much emotion. He said in a low voice,
"That was intense."
I simply nodded, not trusting myself to speak past the lump in my throat. I wanted to claim him, sort of how I felt the werewolf at Vaughn's had wanted to claim me.
"What's wrong, Dawn?"
His voice was filled with concern, which only made me like him more. I would never admit to liking people fawning over me or worrying about me. That was a sign of weakness in my mind. But deep down, it was nice to know that someone cared. Who in their right minds doesn't want to be cared about and loved? To answer his question, I simply rose on my tiptoes and kissed him again. It was shorter this time, but just as passionate. "I almost died tonight," I told him as our lips separated, as if that explained everything I was feeling. Luckily, Derek was a person of few words. He could read between the lines like the best of them. I didn't need to vocally tell him how scared or hesitant or hormonal or lewd I was feeling. He could sense all that with a mere glance of his dashing blue eyes, with the way my body reacted around him. I squeezed myself between his legs, our thighs brushing together. My eyes flashed as I felt his hardness press against my stomach.
Sorry,
he muttered abashedly. It was adorable. "Don't be." The warmth flooding my body surged down between my legs to my most intimate place. I was starting to throb and hum with vibrations and bliss, just as he was. I shoved myself forward again, grinding my body against the heat bulging from his jeans. My hand dipped beneath his t-shirt to feel his hard abs, then started to make its way south.
"Have you considered my proposition from last time, Dawn?"
he asked out of the blue. Uh-oh, wrong words, bad words. I furrowed my brow, my hand freezing at the severe indentation that made up the left part of his V-cut near his hips. "Not now," I urged, the words barely escaping my lips. I kissed his neck, just underneath his chin, felt his Adam's apple bob as he steadied his breath. I was just so damn horny. For a man who seemed able to sense my deepest desires, his misplaced question threw me off and made the growing circle of sunlight within me start to fade to something colder, smaller. I rubbed his V, my fingers slowly dipping beneath the waistband of his jeans. His body jerked. I froze again. "The hell?" I asked, feeling his hands fall on my shoulders. I couldn't mask the concerned expression on my face as he gently withdrew from me. There was a sadness in his eyes that hadn't been there before. He began, trailing off and gulping.
"I've got to get up early in the morning, hun. I'm building Sarah a crib for her incoming baby."
"Incoming?" I said, my voice more venomous than I'd intended. "She's hardly even showing, Derek." With the mention of Sarah, my own body had shut down. The heart-thumping adrenaline had worn off, and the liquid lava I had gleefully felt down below was freezing. God damn it!
Sample complete. Ready to continue?